Bias, the conscious and unconscious hijacker. Bias is a big topic that's starting to gain some traction in organizations. As organizations really start to strive for equality, diversity, inclusion, and they're really focusing on creating strong cultures, particularly now post-pandemic, then by looking at some of our bias, both our conscious and unconscious bias, we can start to make some significant cultural changes, but we can also avoid some of the things like discrimination, harassment, bullying kind of claims that might become evident otherwise if we have a bias that has never actually been identified. So what is it? It's a preference in favor of or against another. So we might call it implicit bias, hidden bias, unconscious prejudice. At the end of the day, a bias is a prejudice, but the term bias just doesn't seem as negative as the word prejudice. So what is a bias? It is basically a preference in favor of or against another thing. Now, to date, there's been 188 biases that have been identified. All right, they may be conscious, they may be unconscious. Having a bias is actually a natural part of the human condition. It is how we actually make decisions, and it's not necessarily always a bad thing. When we talk about bias, though, we do tend to think about it more on the negative side of things. Now, a bias will affect the way that we make decisions, how we engage with other people, how we respond to different situations and circumstances. And the thing with a bias, however, is if we don't understand that we have it, it can actually limit our potential. If we know we've got it, then we can work to reduce it or identify whether it is something that needs to be addressed. Understanding your bias, particularly as a leader, allows you to be able to notice and adjust for it. So cultivate meaningful connections, choose courage to make real change, and unleash their own potential and potential of others. We receive 11 million inputs at a time. And basically the brain can only process 40 of those 11 million bits that are coming to us. So what happens then is our unconscious mind helps us to categorize and make sense of the world, and therefore we're not overwhelmed with data because there's so much information coming at us. We can only look at, if you held up an A4 piece of paper, it's like a pinprick right in the middle. That's all we can process. When we're now slipping into that unconscious autopilot phase, this is where bias can actually start to creep in. And so in a workplace, bias can raise to a level of legality. So when we can address it as a bias, then hopefully we can avoid the legalities. And as I said, there are things like discrimination, harassment, bullying, maybe recruitment practices. Maybe you have a bias against a race or a gender or something like that. So looking at your bias and understanding them early is such an important task to actually do or exercise to do. So what's the impact of bias on an organization? Franklin Covey, these guys are right across bias. If you just Google them, they do free webinars, free recordings. They've got lots of different resources you can have a look at. But basically, employees who perceive themselves to be a target of bias are 3 times more likely to disengage, 3 times more likely to withhold ideas, and 3 times more likely to leave their job within the year. So as you can see, there's now a cost to an organization. The other thing is you've got the risk to bullying, harassment, and discrimination claims. All of these have an impact on morale, absenteeism, attrition. Tackling these bias, getting them out there, and then creating a plan to eliminate them is one of the greatest things that you can start to look at and bringing them to the surface. Take some time, blank piece of paper, sit down and ask yourself a few questions. Just have a think about, do you have any bias? Are there certain things that you have a bias to or against? And there will be, because as I said, it's a normal part of the human condition. But start to have a think about what they are and whether some of these are holding you back, limiting your potential, or maybe even impacting your relationships or your leadership. So are these conscious? Are they unconscious bias? Often asking other people can give you a perspective of the unconscious that you perhaps don't realize that you have. Is there any bias present in your organization? So this is another question to note down and think about. What influence can you have to reduce it, if there is any? And does it influence your recruitment, team development, and promotion of employees' thinking? So this is more back to a personal level. What are your biases going back to? How does it perhaps impact your job? As I said, Franklin Covey, they've got lots of resources. And so you'll see that they have recently just produced this book, The Leader's Guide to Unconscious Bias. There's a podcast on it and a book on it. So we're not affiliated with Franklin Covey, nor do we receive any proceeds from the book, but it is a really helpful tool and resource, particularly the podcast. If you just want to have a look at a quick, short 40 to 60 minute podcast and get an understanding what the experts in the field are saying, it's one I certainly recommend you go and have a look at. So there's three kinds of bias. We've got confirmation bias. That's where we desire to seek out information to confirm our beliefs. So whether it's conscious or unconscious, we physically go looking for the answer to something to prove ourselves right. Let's say somebody has a bad attitude, then we will go seeking out the behaviors that they display to prove ourselves right. Then we have affinity bias. So that's the desire for sameness. People like themselves. So people who feel safe and warm. So I meet someone, we've got the same kind of skills, goals, lifestyles, family situation, and then suddenly I have a bias for them and I think that, this person's amazing because they're just like me. And then we have negativity bias. So hold on to negative information and we forget all the positive. Let's say you have a bias to a particular individual. That person might do a lot of good stuff in a day, but then when they do some stuff that perhaps isn't palatable to your leadership style, then we focus on that and we hold on to the negatives of what they've actually done. So how to reduce your bias? First of all, you've got to identify what they are. You have to start at the start and identify what your bias is. Identify what you would prefer your perspective to be. So if you already know you've got a bias, how would I prefer to view this situation or this particular thing? Then you want to develop an action plan on how you will reduce it, and then practice it every opportunity. The way that your brain works is repetition creates a stronger connection in your brain, which means that starts to form the habit and that starts to form the new way. And then you want to monitor your progress. Just because you decide you want to reduce something or change something doesn't mean it's going to be an instant thing. Change comes with a few steps forward and then a couple of steps backwards and a few sideways steps, but it's about the repetition and it's about the commitment and the keep moving forward to what it is you actually want to achieve. So a final question then. What impact will awareness of this topic make within your organization? Have a think about it. Listen to the video again. There's different kinds of bias. There's issues that bias presents in an organization. We've identified that perhaps we have some in our own leadership style. And then I just want you to take all of that information and do one final reflection of, well, what impact will awareness of this topic make within your organization? Because now that you've got an understanding of the topic, there is no reason why in your next team meeting you can't make bias a topic that you start to discuss with your team and get them to brainstorm, get them to do things around the topic where they are creating insights and awareness for themselves. All right, I hope you enjoyed that video. It is a really good one. It is one that lots of companies are starting to pick up on now, particularly your big top tier firms. And it's a conversation, I guess, that has perhaps been taboo in the past. But if we can start to identify bias now, then hopefully we can cut it off before it becomes a legality. It can be a bit of a game changer in an organization. Thanks so much. See you in the next video.